Hello? Hello? Is there anybody here? Ooh, that could be a problem. Let's see. One person. I'm not sure if that's me or someone else. Yeah. Hello, I see two people. I'm not sure if you guys, can you hear me? Can you tell me if you can hear me? This is the first time I've done this. Okay, my clock says it's 12:01. Can you guys hear me? Okay, last time I'm checking. Can anybody hear me? This is literally the first time I've done this ever, so I'm just giving it just one more minute because I know a few people said they wanted to tune in, and I only see 3 people in here. It is 12:05, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hello to everybody. I have no idea if you're going to be able to see this on my YouTube later, but I hope so people who donated and didn't make it in time can come see it. My name is Nina, so if you're here right now and you have no idea what's going on Tumblr this week I ran a fundraiser for the World Health Organization called Let's Read Good Omens, where I will be literally reading my appropriately seasoned copy. Neil and Terry would be so proud. No tape yet, but we're getting there. I think I'm gonna have to tape this back on after the panel stream. Sorry. So we raised a grand total. Please don't go anywhere. Oh, it shows up backward on here. Cool. $586. Once we get to the end of 59 pages, I'll check and see if anything else came in. Even if not, that's a huge amount of money. That covers, I believe, one researcher for 2 hours or 3 hours to work toward a cure for COVID-19 and a vaccine for COVID-19. So $586 takes us to 59 pages, which I believe is 2 chapters in. And in my book, will actually be page 61 because it doesn't start till page 3 for some reason. So just a quick note of legalese in case anybody is watching this and going, hey, I know Neil gave permission, but no. This is not intended to replace or be prioritized over the actual audiobook or buying your own copy of the paper book. So please, please, please make sure you are supporting the official release. You'll be supporting a fantastic author, the estate of another fantastic author, and also audiobook readers do not make a lot of money, so you will be supporting the livelihood of someone who, does not make a huge wage. So we begin with Good Omens. Oh God, this poor book. This is, if however you read the foreword in this book, they will tell you Good Omens was written by 2 people who at the time were not at all well known, except by the people who knew them. They weren't even certain it would sell. They certainly didn't know they were going to write the most repaired book in the world. So, yeah, I don't feel bad for the state mine's in. I'm actually quite proud. This is the 7th copy I have owned since 2007, and I still got it to this shape. So we will begin. Quick question before I do this. Can you guys hear me okay? Because I have the AC on in here, and I can shut it off if I need to. Can you still hear me? Okay. Okay. And I apologize for the glare on my glasses. Not much I can do about that. It was a nice day. All the days had been nice. There'd been rather more than 7 of them so far, and rain hadn't been invented yet. But clouds massing east of Eden suggested that the first thunderstorm was on its way, and it was going to be a big one. The angel of the eastern gate put his wings over his head to shield himself from the first drops. I'm sorry, he said politely. What was it you were saying? I said that one went down like a lead balloon, said the serpent. Oh, yes, said the angel, whose name was Aziraphale. I think it was a bit of an overreaction, to be honest, said the serpent. I mean, first offense and everything, I can't see what's so bad about knowing the difference between good and evil anyway. It must be bad, reasoned Aziraphale, in the slightly concerned tones of one who can't see it either and is worrying about it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been involved. They just said get up there and make some trouble, said the serpent, whose name was Crawley, although he was thinking of changing it now. Crawley, he'd decided, was not him. Yes, but you're a demon. I'm not sure if it's actually possible for you to do good, said Aziraphale. It's down to your basic, nature. Nothing personal, you understand. You've got to admit it's a bit of a pantomime, though, said Crawley. I mean, pointing out the tree and saying, don't touch in big letters. Not very subtle, is it? I mean, why not put it on top of a high mountain or a long way off? Makes you wonder what he's really planning. Best not to speculate, really, said Aziraphale. You can't second-guess ineffability, I always say. There's right and there's wrong. If you do wrong when you're told to do right, you deserve to be punished. They sat in embarrassed silence, watching the raindrops bruise the first flowers. Eventually, Crawley said, "Didn't you have a flaming sword?" Said the angel. A guilty expression passed across his face and then came back and camped there. "You did, didn't you?" said Crawley. "It flamed like anything." Well, it looked very impressive, I thought. Yes, but, well, lost it, have you? Oh, no, not exactly lost, more, well. Aziraphale looked wretched. "If you must know," he said, a trifle testily, "I gave it away." Crawley stared up at him. "Well, I had to," said the angel, rubbing his hands distractedly. "They looked so cold, poor things, and she's expecting already. And what with the vicious animals out there and the storm coming up, I thought, well, where's the harm? So I just said, look, if you come back here, there's going to be an almighty row. But you might be needing this sword, so here it is. Don't bother to thank me. Just do everyone a favor and don't let the sun go down on you here." He gave Crawley a worried grin. "That was the best course, wasn't it?" "I'm not sure it's actually possible for you to do evil," said Crawley sarcastically. Aziraphale didn't notice the tone. "Oh, I do hope so," he said. "I really do hope so. It's been worrying me all afternoon." They watched the rain for a while. "Funny thing is," said Crawley, "I keep wondering whether the apple thing wasn't the right thing to do as well. A demon can get into real trouble doing the right thing." He nudged the angel. "Funny if we both got it wrong, huh? Funny if I did the good thing and you did the bad one, huh?" "Not really," said Aziraphale. Crawley looked up at the rain. "No," he said, sobering up. "I suppose not." Slate-black curtains tumbled over Eden. Thunder growled among the hills. The animals, freshly named, cowered from the storm. Far away in the dripping woods, something bright and fiery flickered among the trees. It was going to be a dark and stormy night. Good Omens, a narrative of certain events occurring in the last 11 years of human history, in strict accordance, as shall be shown, with the nice and accurate prophecies of Agnes Nutter, compiled and edited with footnotes of an educational nature and precepts for the wise, by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. Featuring dramatis personae, supernatural beings, God, Metatron, the voice of God, Aziraphale, an angel and part-time rare book dealer, Satan, a fallen angel, the adversary, Beelzebub, a likewise fallen angel and prince of hell, Hastur, a fallen angel and duke of hell, Liger, likewise a fallen angel and duke of hell, Crowley, an angel who did not so much fall as saunter vaguely downwards, apocalyptic horsepersons, death, war, famine, pollution, humans, thou shalt not commit adultery, Pulsifer, a witch-finder, Agnes Nutter, a prophetess, Mutant Pulsifer, wages clerk and witch-finder private, Anathema device, practical occultist and professional descendant, Shadwell, witch-finder sergeant, Madam Tracy, painted Jezebel, mornings only, Thursdays by arrangement, and medium. Sister Mary Loquacious, a satanic nun of the Chattering Order of St. Beryl, Mr. Young, a father, Mr. Tyler, a chairman of a residents' association, a delivery man, them, Adam, an antichrist, Pepper, a girl, Wensleydale, a boy, Brian, a boy. Full chorus of Tibetans, aliens, Americans, Atlanteans, and other rare and strange creatures of the last days. And dog, satanical hellhound, and cat warrior. 11 years ago. Current theories on the creation of the universe state that if it was created at all and didn't just start, as it were, unofficially, it came into being between 10 and 20,000 million years ago. By the same token, the Earth itself is generally supposed to be about 4,500 million years old. These dates are incorrect. Medieval Jewish scholars put the date of the creation at 3760 BC. Greek Orthodox theologians put creation as far back as 5508 BC. These suggestions are also incorrect. Archbishop James Ussher, 1580 to 1656, published Annales Veteris et Novi Testamenti in 1654, which suggested that the heaven and the earth were created in 4004 BC. One of his aides took the calculation further and was able to announce triumphantly that the earth was created on Sunday, the 21st of October, 4004 BC at exactly 9 a.m., because God liked to get work done early in the morning while he was feeling fresh. This too was incorrect, by almost a quarter of an hour. The whole business with the fossilized dinosaur skeletons was a joke that paleontologists haven't seen yet. This proves two things. Firstly, that God moves in extremely mysterious, not to say circuitous ways. God does not play dice with the universe. He plays an ineffable game of his own devising, which might be compared from the perspective of any of the other players, i.e. everybody, to being involved in an obscure and complex version of poker in a pitch-dark room with blank cards for infinite stakes with a dealer who won't tell you the rules and who smiles all the time. Secondly, the Earth's a Libra. The astrological prediction for Libra in the Your Stars Today column of the Tadfield Advertiser on the day this history begins read as follows. Libra, September 24th through October 23rd. You may be feeling run down and always in the same old daily round. Home and family matters are highlighted and are hanging fire. Avoid unnecessary risks. A friend is important to you. Shelve major decisions until the way ahead seems clear. You may be vulnerable to a stomach upset today, so avoid salads. Help could come from an unexpected quarter. This was perfectly correct on every count, except the bit about the salads. I am drinking British tea while reading this very British book. It wasn't a dark and stormy night. It should have been, but that's the weather for you. For every mad scientist who's had a convenient thunderstorm just on the night his great work is finished and lying on the slab, there have been dozens who've sat around aimlessly under the peaceful stars while Igor clocks up the overtime. But don't let the fog, with rain later, temperatures dropping to around 45 degrees, give anyone a false sense of security. Just because it's a mild night doesn't mean that dark forces aren't abroad. They're abroad all the time. They're everywhere. They always are. That's the whole point. 2 of them lurked in the ruined graveyard. 2 shadowy figures, one hunched and squat, the other lean and menacing. Both of them Olympic-grade lurkers. If Bruce Springsteen had ever recorded Born to Lurk, these 2 would have been on the album cover. They had been lurking in the fog for an hour now, but they had been pacing themselves and could lurk for the rest of the night, if necessary, with still enough sullen menace left for a final burst of lurking around dawn. Finally, after another 20 minutes, one of them said, "Bugger this for a lark, he should have been here hours ago." The speaker's name was Hastur. He was a Duke of Hell. Many phenomena, wars, plagues, sudden audits, have been advanced as evidence for the hidden hand of Satan in the affairs of man. But whenever students of demonology get together, the M25 London Orbital Motorway is generally agreed to be among the top contenders for Exhibit A. Where they go wrong, of course, is in assuming that the wretched road is evil simply because of the incredible carnage and frustration it engenders every day. In fact, very few people on the face of the planet know that the very shape of the M25 forms the sigil Odegra in the language of the black priesthood of ancient Mu, and means, "Hail the great beast, devourer of worlds." The thousands of motorists who daily fume their way around its serpentine lengths have the same effect as water on a prayer wheel, grinding out an endless fog of low-grade evil to pollute the metaphysical atmosphere for scores of miles around. It was one of Crowley's better achievements. It had taken years to achieve and had involved 3 computer hacks, 2 break-ins, 1 minor bribery, and on one wet night when all else had failed, 2 hours in a squelchy field, shifting the marker pegs a few but occultly incredibly significant meters. When Crowley had watched the first 30-mile-long tailback, he'd experienced the lovely, warm feeling of a bad job well done. It had earned him a commendation. Crowley was currently doing 110 miles per hour somewhere east of Slough. Nothing about him looked particularly demonic, at least by classical standards. No horns, no wings. Admittedly, he was listening to a Best of Queen tape, but no conclusions should be drawn from this because all tapes left in a car for more than a fortnight metamorphose into Best of Queen albums. No particularly demonic thoughts were going through his head. In fact, he was currently wondering vaguely who Moe and Shandon were. Crowley had dark hair and good cheekbones, and he was wearing snakeskin shoes. Or at least, presumably, he was wearing shoes. And he could do really weird things with his tongue. And whenever he forgot himself, he had a tendency to hiss. He also didn't blink much. The car he was driving was a 1926 black Bentley. one owner from new, and that owner had been Crowley. He'd looked after it. The reason he was late was that he was enjoying the 20th century immensely. It was much better than the 17th, and a lot better than the 14th. One of the nice things about time, Crowley always said, was that it was steadily taking him further away from the 14th century. The most bloody, boring 100 years on God's, excuse his French, earth. The 20th century was anything but boring. In fact, a flashing blue light in his rearview mirror had been telling Crowley for the last 50 seconds that he was being followed by two men who would like to make it even more interesting for him. He glanced at his watch, which was designed for the kind of rich deep sea diver who likes to know what the time is in 21 world capitals while he's down there. It was custom made for Crowley. Getting just one chip custom made is incredibly expensive, but he could afford it. This watch gave the time in 20 world capitals and in a capital city in another place, where it was always one time, and that was too late. The Bentley thundered up the exit ramp, took the corner on two wheels, and plunged down a leafy road. The blue light followed. Crowley sighed, took one hand from the wheel, and half turning, made a complicated gesture over his shoulder. The flashing light dimmed into the distance as the police car rolled to a halt, much to the amazement of its occupants. But it would be nothing to the amazement they'd experience when they opened the hood and found out what the engine had turned into. In the graveyard, Hastur, the tall demon, passed a dog end back to Ligger, the shorter one and more accomplished lurker. "I can see a light," he said. "Here he comes now, the flash bastard." "What's that he's driving?" said Ligger. "It's a car, horseless carriage," explained Hastur. "I expect they didn't have them the last time you was here, not for what you might call general use." "They had a man at the front with a red flag," said Liger. "They've come on a bit since then, I reckon." "What's this Crowley like?" said Liger. Hastur spat. "He's been up here too long," he said. "Right from the start. Gone native, if you ask me. Drives a car with a telephone in it." Liger pondered this. Like most demons, he had a very limited grasp of technology, and so he was just about to say something like, "I bet it needs a lot of wire," when the Bentley rolled to a halt at the cemetery gate. "And he wears sunglasses," sneered Hastur. "Even when he don't need to." He raised his voice. "All hail Satan," he said. "All hail Satan," Liger echoed. "Hi," said Crowley, giving them a little wave. "Sorry I'm late, but you know how it is on the A40 at Denham, and then I tried to cut up to Chorley Wood, and then now—" "We aren't all here," said Hastur meaningfully. "We must recount the deeds of the day." "Yeah, deeds," said Crowley, with the slightly guilty look of one who is attending church for the first time in years and has forgotten which bits you stand up for. Hastur cleared his throat. "I have tempted a priest," he said. As he walked down the street and saw the pretty girls in the sun, I put doubt into his mind. He would have been a saint, but within a decade we shall have him." "Nice one," said Crowley helpfully. "I have corrupted a politician," said Liger. "I let him think a tiny bribe would not hurt. Within a year we shall have him." They both looked expectantly at Crowley, who gave them a big smile. "You'll like this," he said. His smile became even wider and more conspiratorial. "I tied up every portable telephone system in central London for 45 minutes at lunchtime," he said. There was silence, except for the distant swishing of cars. Yes, said Hester. And then what? Look, it wasn't easy, said Crowley. That's all, said Liger. Look, people, and exactly what has that done to secure souls for our master, said Hester. Crowley pulled himself together. What could he tell them? That 20,000 people got bloody furious? That you could hear the arteries clanging shut all across the city? And that then they went back and took it out on their secretaries or traffic wardens or whatever, and they took it out on other people? In all kinds of vindictive little ways which, and here was the good bit, they thought up themselves for the rest of the day. The pass-along effects were incalculable. Thousands and thousands of souls all got a faint patina of tarnish, and you hardly had to lift a finger. But you couldn't tell that to demons like Hester and Liger. 4th century minds, the lot of them, spending years picking away at one soul. Admittedly, it was craftsmanship. But you had to think differently these days, not big, but wide. With 5 billion people in the world, you couldn't pick the buggers off one by one anymore. You had to spread your effort. But demons like Liger and Hester wouldn't understand. They'd never have thought up Welsh language television, for example, or value-added tax, or Manchester. He'd been particularly pleased with Manchester. The powers that be seemed to be satisfied, he said. Times are changing. So, what's up? Hester reached down behind a tombstone. This is, he said. Crowley stared at the basket. Oh, he said. No. Yes, said Hester, grinning. Already? Yes. And it's up to me to... Yes. Hester was enjoying this. Why me? Said Crowley desperately. You know me, Hester. This isn't, my scene. Oh, it is, said Hester. Your scene. Your starring role. Take it. Times are changing. Yeah, said Liger, grinning. They're coming to an end, for a start. Why me? You are obviously highly favored, said Hester maliciously. I imagine Liger here would give his right arm for a chance like this. That's right, said Liger. Someone's right arm, anyway, he thought. There were plenty of right arms around. No sense in wasting a good one. Hester produced a clipboard from the grubby recesses of his Mac. Sign. Here, he said, leaving a terrible pause between the words. Crowley fumbled vaguely in an inside pocket and produced a pen. It was sleek and matte black. It looked as though it could exceed the speed limit. It's a nice pen, said Liger. Can write underwater, Crowley muttered. Whatever will they think of next, mused Liger. Whatever it is, they'd better think of it quickly, said Hester. No, not A.J. Crowley, your real name. Crowley nodded mournfully and drew a complex, wiggly sigil on the paper. It glowed redly in the gloom, just for a second, and then faded. What am I supposed to do with it? He said. You will receive instructions, Hester scowled. Why so worried, Crowley? The moment we have been working for all these centuries is at hand. Yeah, right, said Crowley. He did not look now like the lithe figure that had sprung so lively from the Bentley a few minutes ago. He had a hunted expression. Our moment of eternal triumph awaits. Eternal, yeah, said Crowley, and you will be a tool of that glorious destiny. Tool, yeah, muttered Crowley. He picked up the basket as if it might explode, which, in a manner of speaking, it would shortly do. Okay, he said. I'll, be off then, shall I? Get it over with. Not that I want to get it over with, he added hurriedly, aware of the things that could happen if Hastur turned in an unfavorable report. But you know me, keen. The senior demons did not speak. So I'll be popping along, Crowley babbled. See you guys, see you. Great, fine. Ciao. As the Bentley skidded off into the darkness, Liger said, What's that mean? It's Italian, said Hastur. I think it means food. Funny thing to say then, Liger stared at the retreating taillights. You trust him? He said. No, said Hastur. Right, said Liger. Be a funny old world, he reflected, if demons went round trusting one another. Crowley, somewhere west of Amersham, hurtled through the night, snatched a tape at random, and tried to wrestle it out of its brittle plastic box while staying on the road. The glare of a headlight proclaimed it to be Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Soothing music. That's what he needed. He rammed it into the Blaupunkt. Oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. Why now? Why me? He muttered, as the familiar strains of Queen washed over him. And suddenly, Freddie Mercury was speaking to him. Because you've earned it, Crowley. Crowley blessed under his breath. Using electronics as a means of communication had been his idea, and Blow had, for once, taken it up and, as usual, got it dead wrong. He'd hoped they could be persuaded to prescribe Desalnet, but instead they just cut into whatever it happened he was listening to at the time and twisted it. Crowley gulped. Thank you very much, Lord, he said. We have great faith in you, Crowley. Thank you, Lord. This is important, Crowley. I know. This is the big one, Crowley. Leave it to me, Lord. That is what we are doing, Crowley, and if it goes wrong, then those involved will suffer greatly. Even you, Crowley. Especially you. Understood, Lord. Here are your instructions, Crowley. And suddenly he knew. He hated that. They could just as easily have told him. They didn't just suddenly have to drop chilly knowledge straight into his brain. He had to drive to a certain hospital. I'll be there in 5 minutes, Lord. No problem. Good. I see a little silhouette of a man. Scaramouche, will you do the fandango? Crowley thumped the wheel. Everything had been going so well. He'd really had it under his thumb these last few centuries. That's how it goes. You think you're on top of the world, and suddenly they spring Armageddon on you. The Great War, the last battle, heaven versus hell, 3 rounds, 1 fall, no submission, and that'd be that. No more world. That's what the end of the world meant. No more world. Just endless heaven, or, depending who won, endless hell. Crowley didn't know which was worse. Well, hell was worse, of course, by definition, but Crowley remembered what heaven was like, and had quite a few things in common with hell. You couldn't get a decent drink in either of them, for a start, and the boredom you got in heaven was almost as bad as the excitement you got in hell. But there was no getting out of it. You couldn't be a demon and have free will. I will not let you go. Let him go. Well, at least it wouldn't be this year. He'd have time to do things. Unload long-term stocks, for a start. He wondered what would happen if he just stopped the car here on this dark and damp and empty road and took the basket and swung it around and around and let go and... something dreadful. That's what. He'd been an angel once. He hadn't meant to fall. He'd just hung around with the wrong people. The Bentley plunged on through the darkness, its fuel gauge pointing to zero. It had pointed to zero for more than 60 years now. It wasn't all bad being a demon. You didn't have to buy petrol, for one thing. The only time Crowley had bought petrol was once, in 1967, to get the free James Bond bullet hole in the windscreen transfers, which he rather fancied at the time. On the back seat, the thing in the basket began to cry. The air raid siren wail of the newly born. High, wordless, and old. It was quite a nice hospital, thought Mr. Young. It would have been quiet, too, if it wasn't for the nuns. He quite liked nuns. Not that he was a, left-footer or anything like that. No, when it came to avoiding going to church, the church he stolidly avoided going to was St. Cecil and All Angels, no-nonsense C of E, and he wouldn't dreamed of avoiding going to any other. All the others had the wrong smell. Floor polish for the low, somewhat suspicious incense for the high. Deep in the leather armchair of his soul, Mr. Young knew that God got embarrassed at that sort of thing. But he liked seeing nuns around, in the same way that he liked seeing the Salvation Army. It made you feel that it was all right, that people somewhere were keeping the world on its axis. This was his first experience of the Chattering Order of St. Beryl, however. St. Beryl Articulatus of Krakow, reputed to have been martyred in the middle of the 5th century. According to legend, Beryl was a young woman who was betrothed against her will to a pagan, Prince Casimir. On their wedding night, she prayed to the Lord to intercede, vaguely expecting a miraculous beard to appear, and she had in fact already laid in a small ivory-handled razor suitable for ladies against this very eventuality. Instead, the Lord granted Beryl the mysterious ability to chatter continually about whatever was on her mind, however inconsequential, without pause for breath or food. According to one version of the legend, Beryl was strangled by Prince Casimir 3 weeks after the wedding, with their marriage still unconsummated. She died a virgin and a martyr, chattering to the end. According to another version of the legend, Casimir bought himself a set of earplugs and she died in bed with him at the age of 62. The Chattering Order of St. Beryl is under a vow to emulate St. Beryl at all times, except on Tuesday afternoons when, for half an hour, the nuns are permitted to shut up and, if they wish, to play table tennis. Deirdre had run across them while being involved in one of her causes, possibly the one involving lots of unpleasant South Americans fighting other unpleasant South Americans and the priests egging them on, instead of getting on with proper priestly concerns like organizing the church cleaning rota. The point was, nuns should be quiet. They were the right shape for it, like those pointy things you got in those chambers Mr. Young was vaguely aware your hi-fi got tested in. They shouldn't be, well, chattering all the time. He filled his pipe with tobacco. Well, they called it tobacco. It wasn't what he thought of as tobacco. It wasn't the tobacco you used to get. And wondered reflectively what would happen if you asked a nun where the gents was. Probably the Pope sent you a sharp note or something. He shifted his position awkwardly and glanced at his watch. One thing, though, at least the nuns had put their foot down about him being present at the birth. Deirdre had been all for it. She'd been reading things again. One kid already, and suddenly she's declaring that this confinement was going to be the most joyous and sharing experience two human beings could have. That's what came of letting her order her own newspapers. Mr. Young distrusted papers whose inner pages had names like lifestyle or options. Well, he hadn't got anything against joyous sharing experiences. Joyous sharing experiences were fine by him. The world probably needed more joyous sharing experiences. But he had made it abundantly clear that this was one joyous sharing experience Deidre could have by herself. And the nuns had agreed. They saw no reason for the father to be involved in the proceedings. When you thought about it, Mr. Young mused, they probably saw no reason why the father should be involved anywhere. He finished thumbing the so-called tobacco into the pipe and glared at the little sign on the wall of the waiting room that said, for his own comfort, he would not smoke. For his own comfort, he decided he'd go and stand on the porch. If there was a discreet shrubbery for his own comfort out there, so much the better. He wandered down the empty corridors and found a doorway that led out onto a rain-swept courtyard full of righteous dustbins. He shivered and cupped his hands to light his pipe. It happened to them at a certain age. Wives, 25 blameless years, and then suddenly they were going off and doing these robotic exercises in pink socks with their feet cut out. They started blaming you for having never had to work. It was hormones or something. A large black car skidded to a halt by the dustbins. A young man in dark glasses leaped out into the drizzle, holding what looked like a carry cot, and snaked toward the entrance. Mr. Young took his pipe out of his mouth. "You've left your lights on," he said helpfully. The man gave him the blank look of someone to whom lights are the least of his worries, and waved a hand vaguely toward the Bentley. The lights went out. "That's handy," said Mr. Young. "Infrared, is it?" He was mildly surprised to see that the man did not appear to be wet, and that the carry cot appeared to be occupied. "Has it started yet?" said the man. Mr. Young felt vaguely proud to be so instantly recognizable as a parent. "Yes," he said. "They made me go out," he added thankfully. "Already? Any idea how long we've got?" "We," Mr. Young noted, obviously a doctor with views about co-parenting. "I think we were, getting on with it," said Mr. Young. "What room is she in?" said the man hurriedly. "We're in room 3, said Mr. Young. He patted his pockets and found the battered packet which, in accord with tradition, he had brought with him. "Would we care to share a joyous cigar experience?" he said. But the man had gone. Mr. Young carefully replaced the packet and looked reflectively at his pipe. Always in a rush, these doctors, working all the hours God sent. There's a trick they do with 1 pea and 3 cups, which is very hard to follow, and something like it, for greater stakes than a handful of loose change, is about to take place. The text will be slowed down to allow the sleight of hand to be followed. Mrs. Deirdre Young is giving birth in delivery room 3. She is having a golden-haired male baby we will call Baby A. The wife of the American cultural attaché, Mrs. Harriet Dowling, is giving birth in delivery room 4. She is having a golden-haired male baby we will call Baby B. Sister Mary Loquacious has been a devout Satanist since birth. She went to Sabbat school as a child and won black stars for handwriting and liver. When she was told to join the Chattering Order, she went obediently, having a natural talent in that direction and, in any case, knowing that she would be among friends. She would be quite bright if she was ever put in a position to find out, but long ago found that being a scatterbrain, as she'd put it, gave you an easier journey through life. Currently, she is being handed a golden-haired male baby we will call the Adversary, Destroyer of Kings, Angel of the Bottomless Pit, Great Beast that is called Dragon, Prince of this World, Father of Lies, Spawn of Satan, and Lord of Darkness. Watch carefully. Round and round they go. "Is that him?" said Sister Mary, staring at the baby. "Only I'd expected funny eyes, red or green, or teensy-weensy little hoofykins, or a little tail." She turned him around as she spoke. No horns, either. The devil's child looked ominously normal. Yes, that's him, said Crowley. Fancy me holding the Antichrist, said Sister Mary, and bathing the Antichrist and counting his little toesy woesies. She was now addressing the child directly, lost in some world of her own. Crowley waved a hand in front of her wimple. Hello? Hello, Sister Mary. Sorry, sir. He is a little sweetheart, though. Does he look like his daddy? I bet he does. Does he look like his daddy Wattykins? No, said Crowley firmly. And now I should get up to the delivery rooms if I were you. Will he remember me when he grows up, do you think? Said Sister Mary wistfully, sidling slowly down the corridor. Pray that he doesn't, said Crowley, and fled. Sister Mary headed through the nighttime hospital with the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness, safely in her arms. She found a bassinet and laid him down in it. He gurgled. She gave him a tickle. A matronly head appeared around a door. It said, Sister Mary, what are you doing here? Shouldn't you be on duty in room 4? Master Crowley said, just glide along, there's a good nun. Have you seen the husband anywhere? He's not in the waiting room. I've only seen Master Crowley, and he told me. I'm sure he did, said Sister Grace Voluble firmly. I suppose I'd better go and look for the wretched man. Come in and keep an eye on her, will you? She's a bit woozy, but the baby's fine. Sister Grace paused. Why are you winking? Is there something wrong with your eye? You know, Sister Mary hissed archly, the baby's the exchange. Of course, in good time. But we can't have the father wandering around, can we? Said Sister Grace. No telling what he might see. So just wait here and mind the baby. There's a dear. She sailed off down the polished corridor. Sister Mary, wielding her bassinet, entered the delivery room. Mrs. Young was more than woozy. She was fast asleep, with the look of determined self-satisfaction of someone who knows that other people are going to have to do the running around for once. Baby A was asleep beside her, weighed and name-tagged. Sister Mary, who had been brought up to be helpful, removed the name tag, copied it out, and attached the duplicate to the baby in her care. The babies looked similar, both being small, blotchy, and looking sort of, though not really, like Winston Churchill. Now, thought Sister Mary, I could do with a nice cup of tea. Most of the members of the convent were old-fashioned Satanists, like their parents and grandparents before them. They'd been brought up to it and weren't, when you got down to it, particularly evil. Human beings mostly aren't. They just get carried away by new ideas, like dressing up in jackboots and shooting people, or dressing up in white sheets and lynching people, or dressing up in tie-dyed jeans and playing guitars at people. Offer people a new creed with a costume, and their hearts and minds will follow. Anyway, being brought up as a Satanist tended to take the edge off it. It was something you did on Saturday nights, and the rest of the time you simply got on with life as best you could, just like everyone else. Besides, Sister Mary was a nurse, and nurses, whatever their creed, are primarily nurses, which had a lot to do with wearing your watch upside down, keeping calm in emergencies, and dying for a cup of tea. She hoped someone would come soon. She'd done the important bit, now she wanted her tea. So do I. It may help to understand human affairs, to be clear that most of the great triumphs and tragedies of history are caused not by people being fundamentally good or fundamentally bad, but by people being fundamentally people. There was a knock at the door. She opened it. Has it happened yet? Asked Mr. Young. I'm the father, the husband, whatever, both. Sister Mary had expected the American cultural attaché to look like Blake Carrington or J.R. Ewing. Mr. Young didn't look like any American she'd ever seen on television, except possibly for the avuncular sheriff in the better class of murder mystery, with a little old lady as the sleuth, and no car chases unless they're done very slowly. She swallowed her disappointment. "Oh, yes," she said. "Congratulations. Your lady wife's asleep, poor pet." Mr. Young looked over his shoulder. "Twins?" he said. He reached for his pipe. He stopped reaching for his pipe. He reached for it again. "Twins? No one said anything about twins." "Oh, no," said Sister Mary hurriedly. "This one's yours. The other one's, someone else's. Just looking after him till Sister Grace gets back." "No," she reiterated, pointing to the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness. "This one's definitely yours, from the top of his head to the tips of his hoofy-woofies, which he hasn't got," she added hastily. Mr. Young peered down. "Ah, yes," he said doubtfully. "He looks like my side of the family. All, present and correct, is he?" "Oh, yes," said Sister Mary. "He's a very normal child," she added. "Very, very normal." There was a pause. They stared at the sleeping baby. "You don't have much of an accent," said Sister Mary. "Have you been over here long?" "About 10 years," said Mr. Young, mildly puzzled. "The job moved, you see, and I had to move with it." "It must be a very exciting job, I've always thought," said Sister Mary. Mr. Young looked gratified. Not everyone appreciated the more stimulating aspects of cost accountancy. "I expect it was very different where you were before," Sister Mary went on. "I suppose so," said Mr. Young, who'd never really thought about it. Luton, as far as he could remember, was pretty much like Tadfield. The same sort of hedges between your house and the railway station, the same sort of people. "Taller buildings, for one thing," said Sister Mary, desperately. Mr. Young stared at her. The only one he could think of was the Alliance and Leicester offices. "And I expect you go to a lot of garden parties," said the nun. Ah, he was on firm ground here. Deidre was very keen on that sort of thing. "Lots," he said with feeling. "Deidre makes jam for them, you know, and I normally have to help with the white elephant." This was an aspect of Buckingham Palace society that had never occurred to Sister Mary, although the pachyderm fitted right in. "I expect they're the tribute," she said. "I read where foreign potentates give her all sorts of things." "I'm sorry?" "I'm a big fan of the royal family, you know." "Oh, so am I," said Mr. Young, leaping gratefully onto this new ice floe in the bewildering stream of consciousness. Excuse me. "Yes, you knew where you were with the royals. The proper ones, of course, who pulled their weight in the hand-waving and bridge-opening department, not the ones who went to discos all night long and were sick all over the paparazzi." It is possibly worth mentioning at this point that Mr. Young thought that paparazzi was a kind of Italian linoleum. "That's nice," said Sister Mary. "I thought you people weren't too keen on them, what with revoluting and throwing all those tea sets into the river." She chattered on, encouraged by the order's instruction that members should always say what was on their minds. Mr. Young was out of his depth and too tired now to worry about it very much. The religious life probably made people a little odd. He wished Mrs. Young would wake up. Then one of the words in Sister Mary's wittering struck a hopeful chord in his mind. "Would there be any possibility of me possibly being able to have a cup of tea, perhaps?" he ventured. "Oh, my!" said Sister Mary, her hand flying to her mouth. "Whatever am I thinking of?" Mr. Young made no comment. "I'll see to it right away," she said. "Are you sure you don't want coffee, though? There's one of those vendable machines on the next floor." "Tea, please," said Mr. Young. "My word, you really have gone native, haven't you?" said Sister Mary gaily as she bustled out. Mr. Young, left alone with one sleeping wife and two sleeping babies, sagged onto a chair. Yes, it must be all that getting up early and kneeling and so on. Good people, of course, but not entirely compos mentis. He'd seen a Ken Russell film once. There'd been nuns in it. There didn't seem to be any of that sort of thing going on, but no smoke without fire and so on. He sighed. It was then that baby A awoke and settled down to a really good wail. Mr. Young hadn't had to quiet a screaming baby for years. He'd never been much good at it to start with. He'd always respected Sir Winston Churchill, and patting small versions of him on the bottom had always seemed ungracious. "Welcome to the world," he said wearily. "You get used to it after a while." The baby shut its mouth and glared at him as if he were a recalcitrant general. Sister Mary chose that moment to come in with the tea. Satanist or not, she'd also found a plate and arranged some iced biscuits on it. They were the sort you only ever get at the bottom of certain tea-time assortments. Mr. Young's was the same pink as a surgical appliance and had a snowman picked out on it in white icing. "I don't expect you normally have these," she said. "They're what you call cookies. We call them biscuits." Mr. Young had just opened his mouth to explain that yes, so did he, and so did people even in Luton, when another nun rushed in, breathless. She looked at Sister Mary, realized that Mr. Young had never seen the inside of a pentagram, and confined herself to pointing at baby A and winking. Sister Mary nodded and pointed and winked back. The nun wheeled the baby out. As methods of human communication go, a wink is quite versatile. You can say a lot with a wink. For example, the new nun's wink said, "Where the hell have you been? Baby B has been born, we're ready to make the switch, and here's you in the wrong room with the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast it's called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness, drinking tea. Do you realize I've nearly been shot?" And as far as she was concerned, Sister Mary's answering wink meant, "Here's the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness. And I can't talk right now because there's this outsider here." Whereas Sister Mary, on the other hand, had thought that the orderly's wink was more on the lines of, "Well done, Sister Mary, switched over the babies all by herself. Now indicate to me the superfluous child, and I shall remove it and let you get on with your tea with His Royal Excellency, the American culture." And therefore her own wink had meant, "There you go, dearie, that's baby B. Now take him away and leave me to chat to His Excellency. I've always wanted to ask him why they have those tall buildings with all the mirrors on them." The subtleties of all this were quite lost on Mr. Young, who was extremely embarrassed at all this clandestine affection and was thinking, "That Mr. Russell, he knew what he was talking about, and no mistake." Sister Mary's error might have been noticed by the other nun, had she not herself been severely rattled by the Secret Service men in Mrs. Dowling's room, who kept looking at her with growing unease. This was because they had been trained to react in a certain way to people in long flowing robes and long flowing headdresses, and were currently suffering from a conflict of signals. Humans suffering from a conflict of signals aren't the best people to be holding guns, especially when they've just witnessed a natural childbirth, which definitely looked an un-American way of bringing new citizens in the world. Also, they'd heard there were missiles in the building. Mrs. Young stirred. "Have you picked a name for him yet?" said Sister Mary archly. "Hmm?" said Mr. Young. "Oh, no, not really. If it was a girl, it would have been Lucinda, after my mother. Or Germaine, that was Deirdre's choice." "Wormwood's a nice name," said the nun, remembering her classics. "Or Damien. Damien's very popular." So we are about halfway through. I am almost out of tea. It's been about an hour. I'm going to go ahead, get up for 5 minutes, rest my eyes, get something else to drink, and I will be right back. Thank you guys all so much, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Ah. All right. Okay, I am back. If you're wondering why I stood up and immediately took off my glasses, these are actually readers. If you've ever seen a picture of me in square glasses and gone, wait, those aren't the same, I have two pairs. So the other pair is long distance. These ones are short. So welcome back. For anyone who's just tuning in, it looks like it's all the same people, but just in case, this is a live reading of Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett's Good Omens for charity. $10 a page, money going to the World Health Organization. We have raised, let me just do a quick double check, make sure nothing came in. Okay, there's something in junk emails. Is that actually junk or is it? Okay. Ministry of Finance TG. Merhaba Kanim Nasilsi. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I would say that's spam. Okay. So, hi. Thank you, Kate. So just a quick message before we keep going. Since I do work as an essential employee, I want to take this moment to encourage everyone, make sure you're washing your hands so much you think it's going out of style. Practice social distancing. And please, for the love of God, wear a mask when you're going in public. My state does not, hi Sycamore, thank you. My state does not have a mandatory mask law. And I have been coughed on and sneezed at by so many people. And it's like, y'all, just please wash your hands, social distance, wear a mask. The only way that we beat this nonsense is by actually doing what we need to do. So, with that said, let's pick back up. I see someone just joined. Hi. If you're just stepping in, we are on page 35. We're going to page 65. I thought it was page 63 and then realized, oh, hey, fish. Then realized there's a blank page that's numbered, but nothing's on it. So we pick back up. The babies have been switched. Anathema device. Her mother, who was not a great student of religious matters, happened to read the word one day and thought it was a lovely name for a girl. Was 8.5 years old, and she was reading the book under the bedclothes with a torch. Other children learned to read on basic primers with colored pictures of apples, balls, cockroaches, and so forth. Not the device family. Anathema had learned to read from the book. It didn't have any apples and balls in it. It did have a rather good 18th century woodcut of Agnes Nutter being burned at the stake and looking rather cheerful about it. The first word she could recognize was nice. Very few people at the age of 8.5 know that nice also means scrupulously exact, but anathema was one of them. The second word was accurate. The first sentence she had ever read out loud was, I tell ye this, and I charge ye with my words. 4 shall ride, and 4 shall also ride, and 3 shall ride the sky as twixt, and 1 shall ride in flames. And there shall be no stopping them, not fish, nor rain, nor road, neither devil nor angel. And ye shall be there also, Anathema. Anathema liked to read about herself. There were books which caring parents who read the right Sunday papers could purchase with their children's names printed in as the heroine or hero. This was meant to interest the child in the book. In Anathema's case, it wasn't only her in the book, and it had been spot on so far, but her parents and her grandparents and everyone back to the 17th century. She was too young and too self-centered at this point to attach any importance to the fact that there was no mention made of her children, or, indeed, any events in her future further away than 11 years' time. When you're 8.5, 11 years is a lifetime. And of course, if you believed the book, it would be. She was a bright child with a pale face and black eyes and hair. As a rule, she tended to make people feel uncomfortable, a family trait she had inherited, along with being more psychic than was good for her, from her great-great-great-great-great-grandmother. She was precocious and self-possessed. The only thing about anathema her teachers ever had the nerve to upbraid her for was her spelling, which was not so much appalling as 300 years too late. Man, that looks scary on that screen. It's Sunny D. The nuns took baby A and swapped it with baby B under the noses of the attaché's wife and the Secret Service men by the cunning expedient of wheeling one baby away. To be weighed, love, got to do that, it's the law. And wheeling another baby back a little later. The cultural attaché himself, Thaddeus J. Dowling, had been called back to Washington in a hurry a few days earlier, but he had been on the phone to Mrs. Dowling throughout the birth experience, helping her with her breathing. It didn't help that he'd been talking on the other line to his investment counselor. At one point, he'd been forced to put her on hold for 20 minutes. But that was okay. Having a baby is the single most joyous co-experience that two human beings can share, and he wasn't going to miss a second of it. He'd got one of the Secret Service men to videotape it for him. Evil in general does not sleep, and therefore doesn't see why anyone else should. But Crowley liked sleep. It was one of the pleasures of the world, especially after a heavy meal. He'd slept right through most of the 19th century, for example, not because he needed to, simply because he enjoyed it. Although he did have to get up in 1832 to go to the lavatory. One of the pleasures of the world. Well, he'd better start really enjoying them now, while there was still time. The Bentley roared through the night, heading east. Of course, he was all in favor of Armageddon in general terms. If anyone had asked him why he'd been spending centuries tinkering in the affairs of mankind, he'd have said, oh, in order to bring about Armageddon and the triumph of hell. But it was one thing to work to bring it about, and quite another for it to actually happen. Crowley had always known he would be around when the world ended, because he was immortal and wouldn't have any alternative. But he'd hoped it would be a long way off, because he rather liked people. It was a major failing in a demon. Oh, he did his best to make their short lives miserable, because that was his job. But nothing he could think of was half as bad as the stuff they thought up themselves. They seemed to have a talent for it. It was built into the design somehow. They were born into a world that was against them in 1,000 little ways, and then devoted most of their energies to making it worse. Over the years, Crowley had found it increasingly difficult to find anything demonic to do which showed up against the natural background of generalized nastiness. There had been times over the past millennium when he'd felt like sending a message back below saying, look, we may as well give up right now. We might as well shut down dis and pandemonium and everywhere and move up here. There's nothing we can do to them that they don't do to themselves, and they do things we've never even thought of, often involving electrodes. They've got what we lack. They've got imagination. And electricity, of course. One of them had written it, hadn't he? Hell is empty, and all the devils are here. Crowley had got a commendation for the Spanish Inquisition. He had been in Spain then, mainly hanging around cantinas in the nicer parts, and hadn't even known about it until the commendation arrived. He'd gone to have a look, and then had come back and got drunk for a week. That Hieronymus Bosch. What a weirdo. And just when you'd think they were more malignant than hell could ever be, they could occasionally show more grace than heaven ever dreamed of, Often the same individual was involved. It was this free will thing, of course. It was a bugger. Aziraphale had tried to explain it to him once. The whole point, he'd said. This was somewhere around 1020 when they'd first reached their little arrangement. The whole point was that when a human was good or bad, it was because they wanted to be, whereas people like Crowley, and of course himself, were set in their ways right from the start. People couldn't become truly holy, he said, unless they also had the opportunity to be definitively wicked. Crowley had thought about this for some time, and around about 1023 had said, hang on, that only works, right, if you start everyone off equal, okay? You can't start someone off in a muddy shack in the middle of a war zone and expect them to do as well as someone born in a castle. Ah, said Aziraphale, that's the good bit. The lower you start, the more opportunities you have. Crowley had said, that's lunatic. No, said Aziraphale, it's ineffable. Aziraphale. The enemy, of course, but an enemy for 6,000 years now, which made him sort of a friend. Crowley reached down and picked up the car phone. Being a demon, of course, was supposed to mean you had no free will, but you couldn't hang around humans for very long without learning a thing or two. Mr. Young had not been too keen on Damien, or Wormwood, or any of Sister Mary Loquacious' other suggestions, which had covered half of Hal and most of the golden years of Hollywood. Well, she finally said, a little hurt, I don't think there's anything wrong with Errol or Carrie. Very nice American names, both of them. I had fancied something more, well, traditional, explained Mr. Young. We've always gone in for good simple names in our family. Sister Mary beamed. That's right, the old names are always the best, if you ask me. A decent English name, like people had in the Bible, said Mr. Young. Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John, he said, speculatively. Sister Mary winced. Only they've never really struck me as very good Bible names, really, Mr. Young added. They sound more like cowboys and footballers. Saul's nice, said Sister Mary, making the best of it. I don't want something too old-fashioned, said Mr. Young. Or Cain, very modern sound. Cain, really? Sister Mary tried. Mr. Young looked doubtful. Or there's always... Well, there's always Adam, said Sister Mary. That should be safe enough, she thought. Adam? Said Mr. Young. It would be nice to think that the Satanist nuns had the surplus baby, baby B, discreetly adopted. That he grew to be a normal, happy, laughing child, active and exuberant, and after that grew further to become a normal, fairly contented adult. And perhaps that's what happened. Let your mind dwell on his junior school prize for spelling, his unremarkable, although quite pleasant, time at university, his job in the payroll department of the Tadfield and Norton Building Society, his lovely wife. Possibly you would like to imagine some children and a hobby, restoring vintage motorcycles, perhaps, or breeding tropical fish. You don't want to know what could have happened to Baby B. We like your version better anyway. He probably wins prizes for his tropical fish. In a small house in Dorking, Surrey, a light was on in a bedroom window. Newton Pulsifer was 12, and thin, and bespectacled, and he should have been in bed hours ago. His mother, though, was convinced of her child's genius, and let him stay up past his bedtime to do his experiments. His current experiment was changing a plug on an ancient Bakelite radio his mother had given him to work with. He sat at what he proudly called his work top, a battered old table covered in curls of wire, batteries, little light bulbs, and a homemade crystal set that had never worked. Excuse me. He hadn't managed to get the Bakelite radio working yet either, but then again, he never seemed able to get that far. 3 slightly crooked model planes hung on cotton cords from his bedroom ceiling. Excuse me, good Lord, I'm so sorry. Even a casual observer could have seen that they were made by someone who was both painstaking and very careful, and also no good at making model airplanes. He was hopelessly proud of all of them, even the Spitfire, where he'd made rather a mess of the wings. He pushed his glasses back up the bridge of his nose, squinted down at the plug, and put down the screwdriver. He had high hopes for it this time. He'd followed all the instructions on plug changing on page 5 of the boy's own book of practical electronics, including 101 safe and educational things to do with electricity. He'd attached the correct color-coded wires to the correct pins. He'd checked that it was the right amperage fuse. He'd screwed it all back together. So far, no problems. He plugged it into the socket. Then he switched the socket on. Then I dropped the book. Every light in the house went out. Newton beamed with pride. He was getting better. Last time he'd done it, he'd blacked out the whole of Dorking, and a man from the electric had come over and had a word with his mom. He had a burning and totally unrequited passion for things electrical. They had a computer at school, and half a dozen studious children stayed on after school doing things with punched cards. When the teacher in charge of the computer had finally acceded to Newton's pleas to be allowed to join them, Newton had only ever got to feed one little card into the machine. It had chewed it up and choked fatally on it. Newton was certain that the future was in computers, and when the future arrived, he'd be ready, in the forefront of the new technology. The future had its own ideas on this. It was all in the book. Excuse me. Adam, thought Mr. Young. He tried saying it to see how it sounded. Adam. He stared down at the golden curls of the adversary, destroyer of kings, angel of the bottomless pit, great beast that is called dragon, prince of this world, father of lies, spawn of Satan, and lord of darkness. You know, he concluded after a while, I think he actually looks like an Adam. It had not been a dark and stormy night. The dark and stormy night occurred 2 days later, about 4 hours after both Mrs. Dowling and Mrs. Young and their respective babies had left the building. It was a particularly dark and stormy night, and just after midnight, as the storm reached its height, a bolt of lightning struck the convent of the Chattering Order, setting fire to the roof of the vestry. No one was badly hurt by the fire, but it went on for some hours, doing a fair amount of damage in the process. The instigator of the fire lurked on a nearby hilltop and watched the blaze. He was tall, thin, and a Duke of Hell. It was the last thing that needed to be done before his return to the nether regions, and he had done it. He could safely leave the rest to Crowley. Hastur went home. This, by the way, is why you should support your audiobook readers. This is very thirsty work, and people who can do it for hours on end astonish me. Technically, Aziraphale was a principality, but people made jokes about that these days. On the whole, neither he nor Crowley would have chosen each other's company, but they were both men, or at least men-shaped creatures of the world, and the arrangement had worked to their advantage all this time. Besides, he grew accustomed to the only other face that had been around more or less consistently for 6 millennia. The arrangement was very simple. So simple, in fact, that it didn't really deserve the capital letter, which it had got for simply being in existence for so long. It was the sort of sensible arrangement that many isolated agents, working in awkward conditions a long way from their superiors, reached with their opposite number when they realize that they have more in common with their immediate opponents than their remote allies. It meant a tacit non-interference in certain of each other's activities. It also made certain that while neither really won, also neither really lost, and both were able to demonstrate to their masters the great strides they were making against a cunning and well-informed adversary. It meant that Crowley had been allowed to develop Manchester, while Aziraphale had a free hand in the whole of Shropshire. Crowley took Glasgow, Aziraphale had Edinburgh. Neither claimed any responsibility for Milton Keynes, but both had reported it as a success. Note for Americans and other aliens. Milton Keynes is a new city approximately halfway between London and Birmingham. It was built to be modern, efficient, healthy, and all in all a pleasant place to live. Many Britons find this amusing. And then, of course, it had seemed even natural that they should, as it were, hold the fort for one another whenever common sense dictated. Both were of angel stock, after all. If one was going to Hull for a quick temptation, it made sense to nip across the city and carry out a standard brief moment of divine ecstasy. It'd get done anyway, and being sensible about it gave everyone more free time and cut down on expenses. Aziraphale felt the occasional pang of guilt about this, but centuries of association with humanity was having the same effect on him as it was on Crowley, except in the other direction. Besides, the authorities didn't seem to care much who did anything so long as it got done. Currently, what Aziraphale was doing was standing with Crowley by the duck pond in St. James Park. They were feeding the ducks. The ducks in St. James Park are so used to being fed bread by secret agents meeting clandestinely that they have developed their own Pavlovian reaction. Put a St. James Park duck in a laboratory cage and show it a picture of two men, one usually wearing a coat with a fur collar, the other something somber with a scarf, and it'll look up expectantly. The Russian cultural attaché's black bread is particularly sought after by the more discerning duck, while the head of M19's soggy hovis with marmite is relished by the connoisseurs. Aziraphale tossed a crust to a scruffy-looking drake, which caught it and sank immediately. The angel turned to Crowley. "Really, my dear," he murmured. "Sorry," said Crowley. "I was forgetting myself." The duck bobbed angrily to the surface. "Of course, we knew something was going on," Aziraphale said. "But one somehow imagines this sort of thing happening in America. They go in for that sort of thing over there." "It might yet do at that," said Crowley gloomily. He gazed thoughtfully across the park to the Bentley, the back wheel of which was being industriously clamped. "Oh, yes, the American diplomat," said the angel. "Rather showy, one feels. As if Armageddon was some sort of cinematograph... a movie show that you wish to sell in as many countries as possible." "Every country," said Crowley. "The earth and all the kingdoms thereof." Aziraphale tossed the last scrap of bread at the ducks, who went off to pester the Bulgarian naval attaché and a furtive-looking man in a Cambridge tie, and carefully disposed of the paper bag in a waste-paper bin. He turned and faced Crowley. "We'll win, of course," he said. "You don't want that," said the demon. "Why not, pray?" "Listen," said Crowley desperately. "How many musicians do you think your side have got, huh? First grade, I mean." Aziraphale looked taken aback. "Well, I should think," he began. "Two," said Crowley. "Auger and Liszt. That's all. We've got the rest. Beethoven, Brahms, all the Bachs, Mozart, the lot. Can you imagine eternity with Elgar?" Aziraphale shut his eyes. "All too easily," he groaned. "That's it, then," said Crowley, with a gleam of triumph. He knew Aziraphale's weak spot, all right. No more compact discs, no more Albert Hall, no more proms, no more Glindburn. Just celestial harmonies all day long. Ineffable, Aziraphale murmured. Like eggs without salt, you said. Which reminds me, no salt, no eggs, no gravlax with dill sauce, no fascinating little restaurants where they know you, no Daily Telegraph crossword, no small antique shops, no bookshops either, no interesting old editions, no... Crowley scraped the bottom of Aziraphale's barrel of interests. No Regency silver snuff boxes? But after we win, life will be better, croaked the angel. But it won't be as interesting. Look, you know I'm right. You'd be as happy with a harp as I'd be with a pitchfork. You know we don't play harps. And we don't use pitchforks. I was being rhetorical. They stared at one another. Aziraphale spread his elegantly manicured hands. My people are more than happy for it to happen, you know. It's what it's all about, you see. The great final test, flaming swords, the 4 horsemen, seas of blood, the whole tedious business. He shrugged. And then game over, insert coin, said Crowley. Sometimes I find your methods of expression a little difficult to follow. I like the seas as they are. It doesn't have to happen. You don't have to test everything to destruction just to see if you made it right. Aziraphale shrugged again. That's ineffable wisdom for you, I'm afraid. The angel shuddered and pulled his coat around him. Gray clouds were piling up over the city. Let's go somewhere warm, he said. You're asking me, said Crowley glumly. They walked in somber silence for a while. It's not that I disagree with you, said the angel, as they plodded across the grass. It's just that I'm not allowed to disobey. You know that. Me too, said Crowley. Aziraphale gave him a sidelong glance. Oh, come now, he said. You're a demon, after all. Yeah, but my people are only in favor of disobedience in general terms. It's specific disobedience they come down on heavily. Such as disobedience to themselves. You've got it. You'd be amazed. Or perhaps you wouldn't be. How long do you think we've got? Crowley waved a hand at the Bentley, which unlocked its doors. The prophecies differ, said Aziraphale, sliding into the passenger seat. Certainly until the end of the century, although we may expect certain phenomena before then. Most of the prophets of the past millennium were concerned with scansion than accuracy. Crowley pointed to the ignition key. It turned. What? He said. You know, said the angel helpfully. And the world unto an end shall come, and tumpty 1. Or 2 or 3 or whatever. There aren't many good rhymes for 6, so it's probably a good year to be in. And what sort of phenomena? 2-headed calves, signs in the sky, geese flying backwards, showers of fish, that sort of thing. The presence of the Antichrist affects the natural operation of causality. Crowley put the Bentley in gear. Then he remembered something. He snapped his fingers. The wheel clamps disappeared. Let's have lunch, he said. I owe you one from... when was it? Paris, 1793, said Aziraphale. Oh, yes. The Reign of Terror. Was that one of yours or one of ours? Hey, get out of my water. Wasn't it yours? Can't recall. It was quite a good restaurant, though. As they drove past an astonished traffic warden, his notebook spontaneously combusted, to Crowley's amazement. I'm pretty certain I didn't mean to do that, he said. The cat says hi, guys. Can you not? Can you please? Thank you. You guys still hear me okay? I don't know what he did to my computer. Hey, Brat. Hey. We good? Mako, get down from there. Oh, thank you. Hello? Hello? Bueller? Okay, somebody just gave me a thumbs up, so I'm going to assume you guys can still hear me. I would like to apologize for the cat. If you have ever seen the Tumblr post, he is a stinky bastard man. Absolutely, and without question. Where were we? Okay. The pit of despair. As they drove past an astonished traffic warden, his notebook spontaneously combusted, to Crowley's amazement. I'm pretty certain I didn't mean to do that, he said. Aziraphale blushed. That was me, he said. I always thought your people invented them. Did you? We thought they were yours. Crowley stared at the smoke in the rearview mirror. Come on, he said. Let's do the Ritz. Crowley had not bothered to book. In his world, table reservations were things that happened to other people. Aziraphale collected books. If he were totally honest with himself, he would have to have admitted that his bookshop was simply somewhere to store them. He was not unusual in this. In order to maintain his cover as a typical second-hand bookseller, he used every means short of actual physical violence to prevent customers from making a purchase. Unpleasant damp smells, glowering looks, erratic opening hours. He was incredibly good at it. He had been collecting for a long time, and like all collectors, he specialized. He had more than 60 books of predictions concerning developments in the last handful of centuries of the second millennium. He had a penchant for wild first editions, and he had a complete set of the infamous Bibles, individually named from errors in typesetting. These Bibles included the Unrighteous Bible, so called from a printer's error, which caused it to proclaim in 1 Corinthians, "Know ye not that the unrighteous shall inherit the kingdom of God?" And the Wicked Bible, printed by Barker and Lucas in 1632, in which the word "not" get out of my Sunny D. Sorry. Printed by Barker and Lucas in 1632, in which the word "not" was omitted from the seventh commandment, making it "thou shalt commit adultery." There were the Discharge Bible, the Treacle Bible, the Standing Fishes Bible, the Charing Cross Bible, and the rest. Aziraphale had them all. Even the very rarest, a Bible published in 1651 by the London publishing firm of Bilton and Skaggs. He is uncomfortable when things aren't about him. Will you please leave my drink alone? It had been the first of their 3 great publishing disasters. The book was commonly known as the Bugger All This Bible. The lengthy compositor's error, if such it may be called, occurs in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 48, verse 5. And by the border of Dan, from the east to the west side, a portion for Asher. And by the border of Asher, from the east side even unto the west side, a portion for Naphtali. And by the border of Naphtali, from the east side unto the west side, a portion for Manasseh. Bugger all this for a lark. I'm sick to my heart of typesetting. Master Bilton is no gentleman, and Master Skaggs no more than a tight-fisted Southwark knobstick. I tell you, on a day like this, anyone with half an ounce of sense should be out in the sunshine and not stuck here all the livelong day in this mouldy old By Our Lady workshop. @ asterisk, quotes marks, AE, @ semicolon, exclamation mark, asterisk. 6. And by the border of Ephraim, from the east side even unto the west side, a portion for Reuben. Note: the Bugger All This Bible was also noteworthy for having 27 verses in the 3rd chapter of Genesis instead of the more usual 24. They followed verse 24, which in the King James Version reads, So he drove out the man, and he placed at the east of the Garden of Eden cherubims, and a flaming sword which turned every way, to keep the way of the tree of life. And read, And the Lord spake unto the angel that guarded the eastern gate, saying, Where is the flaming sword which was given unto thee? And the angel said, I had it here only a moment ago. I must have put it down somewhere. Forget my own head next. And the Lord did not ask him again. It appears that these verses were inserted during the proof stage. In those days, it was common practice for printers to hang proof sheets to the wooden beams outside their shops for the edification of the populace and some free proofreading. And since the whole print run was subsequently burned anyway, no one bothered to take up this matter with the nice Mr. A. Zeraphale, who ran the bookshop 2 doors along and was always so helpful with the translations, and whose handwriting was instantly recognizable. Bilton and Skaggs' second great publishing disaster occurred in 1653. By a stroke of rare good fortune, they had obtained one of the famed lost quartos, the 3 Shakespeare plays never reissued in folio edition, and now totally lost to scholars and playgoers. Only their names have come down to us. This one was Shakespeare's earliest play, the comedy of Robin Hood, or The Forest of Sherwood. The other 2 are The Trapping of the Mouse and Gold Diggers of 1589. Side note, I am reasonably sure at least one of those titles is made up, but there is actually a lost Shakespeare play called Love's Labour's Love's Labour's Won, and it makes me sad that we'll never get to see it. Master Bilton had paid almost 6 guineas for the quarto and believed he could make nearly twice that much back on the hardcover folio alone. Then he lost it. Bilton and Skaggs' third great publishing disaster was never entirely comprehensible to either of them. Everywhere you looked, books of prophecy were selling like crazy. The English edition of Nostradamus' Centuries had just gone into its 3rd printing, and 5 Nostradamuses, all claiming to be the only genuine one, were on triumphant signing tours. And Mother Shipton's collection of prophecies was sprinting out of shops. Each of the great London publishers, there were 8 of them, had at least one book of prophecy on its list. Every single one of the books was wildly inaccurate, but their air of vague and generalized omnipotence made them immensely popular. They sold in the thousands and in the tens of thousands. "It is a license to print money," said Master Bilton to Master Skaggs, who had already had a few thoughts in that direction, and spent the last years of his life in Newgate Prison when he eventually put them into practice. "The public are crying out for such rubbish. We must straightway print a book of prophecy by some hag." The manuscript arrived at their door the next morning. The author's sense of timing, as always, was exact. Although neither Master Bilton nor Master Skaggs realized it, the manuscript they had been sent was the sole prophetic work in all of human history to consist entirely of completely accurate predictions concerning the following 340-odd years, being a precise and accurate description of the events that would culminate in Armageddon. It was on the money in every single detail. It was published by Bilton and Skaggs in September 1655 in good time for the Christmas trade. Another masterstroke of publishing genius, because Oliver Cromwell's Puritan Parliament had made Christmas illegal in 1654, and it was the first book printed in England to be remaindered. It didn't sell. Not even the copy in the tiny Lancashire shop with "local author" on a piece of cardboard next to it. The author of the book, one Agnes Nutter, was not surprised by this. But then, it would have taken an awful lot to surprise Agnes Nutter. Anyway, she hadn't written it for the sales, or the royalties, or even the fame. She had written it for the single gratis copy of the book that an author was entitled to. No one knows what happened to the legions of unsold copies of her book. Certainly none remain in any museums or private collections. Even Aziraphale does not possess a copy, but would go weak at the knees at the thought of actually getting his exquisitely manicured hands on one. In fact, only one copy of Agnes Nutter's prophecies remained in the entire world. It was on a bookshelf about 40 miles away from where Crowley and Aziraphale were enjoying a rather good lunch, and, metaphorically, it had just begun to tick. And now it was 3 o'clock. The Antichrist had been on Earth for 15 hours, and one angel and one demon had been drinking solidly for 3 of them. They sat opposite one another in the back room of Aziraphale's dingy old bookshop in Soho. Most bookshops in Soho have back rooms, and most of the back rooms are filled with rare or at least very expensive books. But Aziraphale's books didn't have illustrations. They had old brown covers and crackling pages. Occasionally, if he had no alternative, he'd sell one. And occasionally, serious men in dark suits would come calling and suggest, very politely, that perhaps he'd like to sell the shop itself so that it could be turned into the kind of retail outlet more suited to the area. What are you chewing? Hey, give me that. I apologize. This cat is a brat. No, do not pull that out of the garbage. You're not supposed to be eating washi tape. Good Lord. Okay. Sometimes they'd offer cash in large rolls of grubby 50-pound notes. Or sometimes, while they were talking, other men in dark glasses would wander around the shops, shaking their head and saying how inflammable paper was, and what a fire trap he had here. And Aziraphale would nod and smile and say that he'd think about it, and then they'd go away. And they'd never come back. Just because you're an angel doesn't mean you have to be a fool. The table in front of the two of them, was covered with bottles. "The point is," said Crowley, "the point is, the The point is, he tried to focus on Aziraphale. The point is, he tried to think of a point. The point I'm trying to make, he said, brightening, is dolphins. That's my point. Kind of fish, said Aziraphale. No, said Crowley, shaking a finger. It's a mammal. Actual mammal. Difference is, really, child? Crowley waded through the swamp of his mind and tried to remember the difference. Difference is, they made out of water? Volunteered Aziraphale. Crowley's brow furrowed. No, don't think so. Pretty sure that's not it. Something about their young. Whatever. He pulled himself together. The point is their brains. He reached for a bottle. What about their brains? Said the angel. Big brains. That's my point. Size of damn big brains. And then there's the whales. Brain City, take it from me. Whole damn sea full of brains. Kraken, said Aziraphale, staring moodily into his glass. Crowley gave him the long, cool look of someone who has just had a girder dropped in front of his train of thought. Huh? Great big bugger, said Aziraphale. Sleepeth beneath the thunders of the upper deep, under loads of huge and unnumbered bloody great seaweeds, you know, supposed to rise to the surface right at the end when the sea boils. Yeah? Fact. There you are, then, said Crowley, sitting back. Whole sea bubbling, poor old dolphins, so much seafood gumbo, no one giving a damn, save with gorillas. Woohoo, they say. Sky's gone all red, stars crashing to the ground when they're putting in bananas these days. And then they make nests, you know, gorillas, said the angel, pouring another drink and managing to hit the glass on the third go. Nah. God's truth. Saw a film. Nests. That's birds, said Crowley. Nests, insisted Aziraphale. Crowley decided not to argue the point. But there you are, then, he said. All creatures, great and small, great and small. A lot of them with brains, and then, bazam. But must you? But you're part of it, said Aziraphale. You tempt people. You're good at it. Crowley thumped his glass on the table. That's different. They don't have to say yes. That's the ineffable bit, right? Your side made it up. You've got to keep testing people, but not to destruction. All right. I don't like it any more than you. But I told you I can't not do what I'm told. I'm an angel. There's no theaters in heaven, said Crowley. And very, very few films. Don't you try to tempt me, said Aziraphale wretchedly. I know you, you old serpent. Just you think about it, said Crowley relentlessly. You know what eternity is? You know what eternity is? Do you know what eternity is? There's this big mountain, say a mile high, and at the end of the universe, and once every 1,000 years, there's this little bird. What little bird? Said Aziraphale suspiciously. This little bird I'm talking about. And every 1,000 years. The same bird every 1,000 years? Crowley hesitated. Yeah, he said. Bloody ancient bird, then. Okay, and every 1,000 years this bird flies all the way to this mountain and sharpens its beak. Hold on, you can't do that. Between here and the end of the universe, there's loads of... The angel waved a hand expansively, if a little unsteadily. Loads of buggerall, dear boy. That's you, loads of buggerall. But it gets there anyway, Crowley persevered. How? Doesn't matter. Could use a spaceship, said the angel. Crowley subsided a bit. Yeah, he said, if you like. Anyway, this bird. Only it is the end of the universe we're talking about, said Aziraphale. So it'd have to be one of those spaceships where your descendants are the ones who get out at the other end. You have to... Good job! You have to tell your descendants, you say, when you get to the mountain, you've got to... He hesitated. What have they got to do? Sharpen its beak on the mountain, said Crowley. And then it flies back. In the spaceship? And after 1,000 years, it goes and does it all again, said Crowley quickly. There was a moment of drunken silence. Seems a lot of effort just to sharpen a beak, mused Aziraphale. Listen, said Crowley urgently. The point is that when the bird has worn the mountain down to nothing, right, then... Aziraphale opened his mouth. Crowley just knew he was going to make some point about the relative hardness of birds' beaks and granite mountains, and plunged on quickly. Then you still won't have finished watching The Sound of Music. Aziraphale froze. And you'll enjoy it, Crowley said relentlessly. You really will. My dear boy, you won't have a choice. Listen, heaven has no taste. Now and not one single sushi restaurant. A look of pain crossed the angel's suddenly very serious face. I can't cope with this while I'm drunk, he said. I'm gonna sober up. Me too. They both winced as the alcohol left their bloodstreams and sat up a bit more neatly. Aziraphale straightened his tie. I can't interfere with divine plans, he croaked. Crowley looked speculatively into his glass and then filled it again. What about diabolical ones, he said. Pardon? Well, it's got to be a diabolical plan, hasn't it? We're doing it. My side. Ah, but it's all part of the overall divine plan, said Aziraphale. Your side can't do anything without it being part of the ineffable divine plan, he added with a trace of smugness. You wish! No, that's the... Aziraphale snapped his fingers irritably. The thing, what do you call it in your colorful idiom? The line at the bottom? The bottom line. Yes, it's that. Well, if you're sure, said Crowley. No doubt about it. Crowley looked up slyly. Then you can't be certain, correct me if I'm wrong, you can't be certain that thwarting it isn't part of the divine plan, too. I mean, you're supposed to thwart the wiles of the evil one at every turn, aren't you? Aziraphale hesitated. There is that, yes. You see a wile, you thwart. Am I right? Broadly, actually, I encourage humans to do the actual thwarting because of ineffability, you understand? Right. So all you've got to do is thwart. Because if I know anything, said Crowley urgently, It's that the birth is just the start. It's the upbringing that's important. It's the influences. Otherwise, the child will never learn to use its powers. He hesitated. At least not necessarily as intended. Certainly our side won't mind me thwarting you, said Aziraphale thoughtfully. They won't mind that at all. Right. It'd be a real feather in your wing. Crowley gave the angel an encouraging smile. What will happen to the child if it doesn't get a satanic upbringing, though? Said Aziraphale. Probably nothing. It'll never know. But genetics! Don't tell me from genetics, said Crowley. What have they got to do with it? Look at Satan. Created as an angel, grows up to be the great adversary. Hey, if you're going to go on about genetics, you might as well say the kid will grow up to be an angel. After all, his father was really big in heaven in the old days. Saying he'll grow up to be a demon just because his dad became one is like saying a mouse with its tail cut off will give birth to tailless mice. No, upbringing is everything. Take it from me. And without unopposed satanic influences, well, at worst, hell will have to start all over again, and the earth gets at least another 7 years, 11 years. That's got to be worth something, hasn't it? Now Aziraphale was looking thoughtful again. You're saying the child isn't evil of itself, he said slowly. Potentially evil. Potentially good, too, I suppose. Just this huge, powerful potentiality waiting to be shaped, said Crowley. He shrugged. Anyway, why are we talking about this good and evil? They're just names for sides. We know that. I suppose it's got to be worth a try, said the angel. Crowley nodded encouragingly. Agreed, said the demon, holding out his hand. The angel shook it cautiously. It'll certainly be more interesting than saints, he said. And it'll be for the child's own good in the long run, Crowley. We'll be godfathers, sort of. Overseeing his religious upbringing, you might say. Aziraphale beamed. You know, I'd never thought of that, he said. Godfathers. Well, I'll be damned. It's not too bad, said Crowley, when you get used to it. She was known as Scarlet. At that time, she was selling arms, although it was beginning to lose its savor. She never stuck at one job for very long. 300-400 years at the outside. You didn't want to get in a rut. Her hair was true auburn, neither ginger nor brown, but a deep and burnished copper color, and it fell to her waist in tresses that men would kill for, and indeed often had. Her eyes were a startling orange. She looked 25, and always had. Hey, come back here! Will you stop terrorizing my crochet? And my washi tape? Didn't we just go over this? I would like to apologize. She had a dusty, brick-red truck full of assorted weaponry, and an almost unbelievable skill at getting across any border in the world. She had been on her way to a small West African country where a minor civil war was in progress to make a delivery which would, with any luck, turn it into a major civil war. Unfortunately, the truck had broken down, far beyond even her ability to repair it, and she was very good with machinery these days. She was in the middle of a city at the time. Nominally a city. It was the size of an English county town, or translated into American terms, a shopping mall. The city in question was the capital of Kombolaland, an African nation which had been at peace for the last 3,000 years. For about 30 years it was Sir Humphrey Clarkson land, but since the country had absolutely no mineral wealth and the strategic importance of a banana, it was accelerated towards self-government with almost unseemly haste. Kombolaland was poor, perhaps, and undoubtedly boring, but peaceful. Its various tribes, who got along with one another quite happily, had long since beaten their swords into plowshares. A fight had broken out in the city square in 1952 between a drunken ox drover and an equally drunken ox thief. People were still talking about it. Scarlet yawned in the heat. She fanned her head with her broad-brimmed hat, left the useless truck in the dusty street, and wandered into a bar. She bought a can of beer, drained it, and then grinned at the barman. "I got a truck needs repairing," she said. "Anyone around I can talk to?" The barman grinned, white and huge and expansively. He'd been impressed by the way she drank her beer. "Only Nathan, miss, but Nathan has gone back to Kaunda to see his father-in-law's farm." Scarlet bought another beer. "So, this Nathan, any idea when he'll be back?" "Perhaps next week, perhaps 2 weeks' time, dear lady." "Oh, that Nathan, he is a scamp, no?" He leaned forward. "You traveling alone, miss?" "Yes." "Could be dangerous. Some funny people on the roads these days. Bad men. Not local boys," he added quickly. Scarlet raised a perfect eyebrow. Despite the heat, he shivered. "Thanks for the warning," Scarlet purred. Her voice sounded like something that lurks in the long grass, visible only by the twitching of its ears, until something young and tender wanders by. She tipped her hat to him and strolled outside. The hot African sun beat down on her. Her truck sat in the middle of the street with a cargo of guns and ammunition and landmines. It wasn't going anywhere. Scarlet stared at the truck. A vulture was sitting on its roof. It had traveled 300 miles with Scarlet so far. It was belching quietly. She looked around the street. A couple of women chatted on a street corner. A bored market vendor sat in front of a heap of colored gourds, fanning the flies. A few children played lazily in the dust. "What the hell," she said quietly. "I could do with a holiday anyway." That was Wednesday. By Friday, the city was a no-go area. By the following Tuesday, the economy of Kombola land was shattered. 20,000 people were dead, including the barman shot by the rebels while storming the market barricades. Almost 100,000 people were injured, and all of Scarlet's assorted weapons had fulfilled the function for which they had been created, and the vulture had died of greasy degeneration. Scarlet was already on the last train out of the country. It was time to move on, she felt. She'd been doing arms for too long. She wanted a change, something with openings. She quite fancied herself as a newspaper journalist. A possibility. She fanned herself with her hat and crossed her long legs in front of her. Farther down the train, a fight broke out. Scarlet grinned. People were always fighting, over her and around her. It was rather sweet, really. Sable had black hair, a trim black beard, and he had just decided to go corporate. He did drinks with his accountant. "How we doing, Franny?" he asked her. 12 million copies sold so far. Can you believe that? They, they were doing drinks in a restaurant called Top of the Sixes on the top of 666 Fifth Avenue, New York. This was something that amused Sable ever so slightly. From the restaurant windows, you could see the whole of New York. At night, the rest of New York could see the huge red 666s that adorned all four sides of the building. Of course, it was just another street number. If you started counting, you'd be bound to get to it eventually. But you had to smile. Sable and his accountant had just come from a small, expensive, and particularly exclusive restaurant in Greenwich Village, where the cuisine was entirely nouvelle. A string bean, a pea, and a sliver of chicken breast, aesthetically arranged on a square china plate. Sable had invented it the last time he'd been in Paris. His accountant had polished her meat and 2 veg off in under 50 seconds, and had spent the rest of the meal staring at the plate, the cutlery, and from time to time her fellow diners, in a manner that suggested she was wondering what they'd taste like, which was in fact the case. It had amused Sable enormously. He toyed with his Perrier. 12 million, huh? That's pretty good. That's great. So we're going corporate. It's time to blow the big one, am I right? California, I think. I want factories, restaurants, the whole schmear. We'll keep the publishing arm, but it's time to diversify. Yeah? Franny nodded. Sounds good, Sable. We'll need... She was interrupted by a skeleton. A skeleton in a Dior dress with tanned skin stretched almost to snapping point over the delicate bones of the skull. The skeleton had long blonde hair and perfectly made-up lips. She looked like the kind of person mothers around the world would point to, muttering, "That's what'll happen to you if you don't eat your greens." She looked like a famine relief poster with style. She was New York's top fashion model, and she was holding a book. She said, excuse me, Mr. Sable. I hope you don't mind me intruding, but your book, it changed my life, and I was wondering, would you sign it for me?" She stared imploringly at him, with eyes deep sunk in gloriously eyeshadowed sockets. It was not surprising that she had recognized him, for his dark gray eyes stared out from his photo on the foil embossed cover. Foodless Dieting. Slim Yourself Beautiful, the book was called. The diet book of the centuries. "How do you spell your name?" he asked. "Cheryl. 2 R's, 1 Y, 1 L. "You remind me of an old, old friend," he told her, as he wrote swiftly and carefully on the title page. "There you go. Glad you liked it. Always good to meet a fan." What he'd written was this: "Cheryl, a measure of wheat for a penny, and 3 measures of barley for a penny, and see thou hurt not the oil and the wine." Revelation 6:6, Dr. Raven Sable. "It's from the Bible," he told her. She closed the book reverently and backed away from the table, thanking Sable. He didn't know how much this meant to her. He had changed her life. Truly he had. He had never actually earned the medical degree he claimed, since there hadn't been any universities in those days, but Sable could see she was starving to death. He gave her a couple of months at the outside. Foodless. Handle your weight problem. Terminally. Franny was stabbing at her laptop computer hungrily, planning the next phase in Sable's transformation of the eating habits of the Western world. Sable had bought her the machine as a personal present. It was very, very expensive, very powerful, and ultra slim. He liked slim things. "There's a European outfit we can buy into for the initial toehold. Holdings Incorporated. That'll give us the Liechtenstein tax base. Now, if we channel funds out through the Caymans into Luxembourg and from there to Switzerland, we could pay for the factories and..." But Sable was no longer listening. He was remembering the exclusive little restaurant. It had occurred to him that he had never seen so many rich people so hungry. Sable grinned, the honest, open grin that goes with job satisfaction, perfect and pure. He was just killing time until the main event, but he was killing it in such exquisite ways. Time, and sometimes people. Sometimes he was called White, or Blanc, or Albus, or Chalky, or Vice, or Snowy, or any one of 100 other names. His skin was pale, his hair a faded blonde, his eyes light gray. He was somewhere in his 20s at a casual glance, and a casual glance was all anyone ever gave him. He was almost entirely unmemorable. Unlike his 2 colleagues, he could never settle down in any one job for very long. He had had all manner of interesting jobs in lots of interesting places. He had worked at the Chernobyl power station, and at Windscale, and at 3 Mile Island, always in minor jobs that weren't very important. He had been a minor but valued member of a number of scientific research establishments. He had helped to design the petrol engine, and plastics, and the ring pull can. He could turn his hand to anything. Nobody really noticed him. He was unobtrusive. His presence was cumulative. If you thought about it carefully, you could figure out he had to have been doing something, had to have been somewhere. Maybe he even spoke to you. But he was easy to forget, was Mr. White. At this time, he was working as deckhand on an oil tanker heading toward Tokyo. The captain was drunk in his cabin. The first mate was in the head. The second mate was in the galley. And that was pretty much it for the crew. The ship was almost completely automated. There wasn't much a person could do. However, if a person just happened to press the emergency cargo release switch on the bridge, the automatic systems would take care of releasing huge quantities of black sludge into the sea, millions of tons of crude oil, with a devastating effect on the birds, fish, vegetation, animals, and humans of the region. Of course, there were dozens of fail-safe interlocks and foolproof safety backups, but what the hell? There always were. Afterwards, there was a huge amount of argument as to exactly whose fault it was. In the end, it was left unresolved. The blame was apportioned equally. Neither the captain, the first mate, nor the second mate ever worked again. For some reason, nobody gave much of a thought to Seaman White, who was already halfway to Indonesia on a tramp steamer piled high with rusting barrels of a particularly toxic weed killer. And there was another. He was in the square in Kumbola Land, and he was in the restaurants, and he was in the fish, and in the air, and in the barrels of weed killer. He was on the roads, and in houses, and in palaces, and in hovels. There was nowhere that he was a stranger, and there was no getting away from him. He was doing what he did best, and what he was doing was what he was. He was not waiting. He was working. So we have reached page 66. I'm going to do one last check, see if anything else has come in. Work with me, Internet. Okay, it looks like that is it. So thank you guys so very much. Hope you've been entertained for the last couple of hours at least. We raised almost $590 for the World Health Organization, which is absolutely fantastic. I appreciate all of you so much for everything that you have donated and for taking part in this project. Stay safe. Again, like I said when I came back from my first break, please make sure you're washing your hands, wearing your masks, staying as far from other people as possible. The social distancing guidelines say 6 feet, but recent research shows that the virus might actually travel as far as 27 feet. So, stay indoors when you can and wear your masks when you have to go out. Again, thank you all for participating. Have a wonderful rest of your day or night, wherever in the world you might be, and maybe we'll see about doing this again soon. Thanks.